The look on my cousin Clara's face when she realized the owner of her dream wedding venue, the one she'd just brutally uninvited me from, was me. That look was worth every single penny of the $8 million I paid for it. It wasn't just a look of shock. It was a symphony of emotions, a chaotic crash of arrogance turning to disbelief, then dawning horror, and finally, the sickening crumble of absolute defeat. I savored it. I let it wash over me, a warm, vindicating wave after years of being chilled by her family's passive-aggressive frost. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but in that moment, watching her perfectly curated world shatter into a million tiny, expensive pieces, it felt gloriously, incandescently hot. I'm so glad you're here to listen to this. Because this isn't just a story about a wedding or a venue. It's about family, the lines we draw, and the moments that force us to build our own damn castles when they refuse to let us through the gates. It's about realizing that sometimes the only way to protect the memory of someone you loved is to show their legacy of kindness by refusing to tolerate cruelty. It all started on a Tuesday. A day so painfully ordinary it gave no warning of the emotional car crash that was about to happen. I was in my home office, overlooking the San Francisco Bay, the fog rolling in like a soft gray blanket. I was on a conference call, hashing out the final details of a multi-million-dollar software integration for my tech company, the company I built from the ground up in my tiny garage apartment a decade ago. It was stressful. High-stakes work, but it was my life's passion. In the middle of it all, my phone buzzed with a call from Clara. A wave of genuine warmth spread through my chest. I excused myself from the call, a huge smile on my face. "Hey, cuz! What's up? Are the invitations out yet? I've been checking my mail like a kid waiting for a letter from Hogwarts." I laughed, the sound genuine and full of affection. The silence on the other end was the first red flag. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was heavy, packed with something I couldn't quite name. "Amelia," she finally said, and the way she said my name was wrong. It was flat, stripped of all the warmth we'd shared growing up. It was the voice you use with a stranger, a telemarketer. "Clara? Is everything okay?" I asked, my smile faltering. I could hear faint noises in the background, the clinking of a glass, and what sounded like my Aunt Carol, her mother, whispering something sharp and indistinct. "Listen, Amelia, I'm calling about the wedding," she started, her voice gaining a sort of rehearsed, brittle confidence. "Liam and I well, the whole family, we've had to make some difficult decisions about the guest list." My stomach tightened. Difficult decisions? We were family. More than that, we were supposed to be like sisters. My mom, her mom's older sister, had passed away from cancer 5 years ago. And on her deathbed, she'd made me promise one thing. "Take care of the family, Amelia," she'd whispered, her hand frail in mine. "Don't let silly fights or money pull you apart. You and Clara, you stick together." I had taken that promise to heart. It was the guiding principle of my life. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I stood up and walked to the window, watching a lone sailboat cut through the gray water. It's become a very exclusive, very intimate affair," she said, and I could almost hear the smirk in her voice. "We want people there who truly understand and are part of our world now. It's a certain vibe we're going for." Her world. My blood started to run cold. Was my world the one of late nights coding, of building a business that employed over 200 people, of honoring my mother's memory by trying to hold our fractured family together, not the right vibe? "Clara, what are you trying to say?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Then came the kill shot, delivered with the casual cruelty of a playground bully. "You're not invited, Amelia. I'm sorry if that's blunt, but it's better you hear it from me. Your lifestyle. It's just a bit much. The tech mogul thing, it's intimidating. It makes people uncomfortable. We just want a simple, elegant day without any distractions. Distractions. Intimidating. The words echoed in the sudden silence of my office. I was a distraction. My success, the very thing I had worked my entire life for. The success that allowed me to help Aunt Carol with her mortgage last year. The success that paid for my grandmother's top-tier medical care was now the reason I was being cast out. I felt the floor drop out from under me. It wasn't just about a wedding invitation. It was a fundamental rejection of who I was, a dismissal of my entire life. And it was a complete betrayal of the promise I made to my mother. I could hear Aunt Carol in the background again, louder this time. "Just tell her, Clara, rip the Band-Aid off. She'll get over it." I felt a blinding, white-hot rage build behind my eyes, so intense it made me dizzy. But my voice, when I finally spoke, was eerily calm. "I see," I said. "And the venue? You're still set on Blackwood Manor, I assume?" Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just a venue. It was our childhood dream. A sprawling, historic estate nestled in Napa Valley with ancient oak trees and ivy-covered stone walls. We used to sneak onto the grounds as kids, daring each other to run across the great lawn, peering into the ballroom windows and dreaming. We made a pact, written in glitter pen on a piece of notebook paper, that we would both get married there one day, that we would be each other's maid of honor. The memory felt like a shard of glass in my heart. "Of course," she said, her voice dripping with superiority. "Liam's family has connections. We were able to secure it. It's the perfect backdrop for the life we're building." Her words were meant to hurt, to emphasize the world she was in and I was not. And they did. They hurt more than I could ever put into words. But as I stood there, reeling from the blow, staring out at the vast, endless bay, a different feeling started to bubble up through the pain. It was a cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear sense of purpose. An idea, wild and audacious, began to take root in the scorched earth of my heart. If they wanted to build their life on the foundation of our shared dreams while kicking me out of the picture, then I would do what I did best. I would change the blueprint. I would buy the whole damn foundation. "Well, Clara," I said, my voice now laced with a sweetness that was pure poison, "I wish you all the best. I truly hope you get the wedding of your dreams." I hung up the phone before she could reply, the silence in my office ringing with the declaration of a war she didn't even know I had just declared. If you know what it feels like to be underestimated, to be cast aside by the very people who are supposed to love you, then you're in the right place. Stick with me, because this is just the beginning. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel, because you are not going to want to miss a single detail of what happened next. For a long time after that phone call, I just stood there, my hand still resting on my phone, the sleek glass cold against my skin. The world outside my window kept moving, ferries gliding across the water, cars streaming over the Bay Bridge, but inside my office, time had frozen. The only sound was the frantic, panicked thumping of my own heart. I felt hollowed out, like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything soft and warm, leaving only a cavern of cold, echoing shock. Every word Clara had said played on a loop in my head. A certain vibe, intimidating, distractions, you're not invited. Each phrase was a fresh jab, twisting the knife a little deeper. This wasn't just an uninvitation, it was an excommunication, a deliberate and calculated act of cruelty designed to put me in my place. And the fact that my Aunt Carol was in the background, coaching her, urging her on, that added a layer of betrayal that was almost suffocating. I sank into my leather office chair, the one I'd bought myself as a reward after my company's IPO, and a bitter laugh escaped my lips. Intimidating. Was that what they called it? I thought back to all the times my intimidating success had been incredibly convenient for them. 2 years ago, when Clara's fiancé, Liam, a man who always struck me as having more ambition than integrity, had a brilliant startup idea and needed seed money. Who wrote the $50,000 check? No questions asked. Because Clara had begged me, saying it would make or break their future. Me. Last Christmas, when Aunt Carol went on and on about her leaky roof and the astronomical quotes she was getting, who quietly called a contractor and paid for the entire replacement, telling her it was my Christmas gift? Me. My success was only a problem, it seemed, when it couldn't be used, when it only served to highlight the gap between my life and the one they were so desperately trying to project. The pain was so sharp it was physical. It felt like grief. I was mourning the loss of the cousin I thought I had, the family I thought I belonged to. I was mourning the memory of my mother and the failure of the promise I'd made to her. I let myself feel it, all of it, the stinging humiliation, the deep, aching sadness, the bewilderment. I let the tears come, hot and angry, streaming down my face and dripping onto the polished surface of my desk. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, something else began to crystallize in the pit of my stomach. Beneath the grief, the rage was hardening, cooling from a molten, chaotic mess into something solid, sharp, and focused. It was the same feeling that had propelled me through sleepless nights in college, fueled by instant noodles and sheer willpower. It was the same grit that made me walk into rooms full of venture capitalists who looked at me like I was a novelty and walk out with their funding. It was the decision to stop being a victim and start being a strategist. They thought I was a distraction. They had underestimated me. They saw me as an ATM, a convenient resource to be tapped when needed and hidden away when my presence made them feel insecure. They had made a critical error in judgment. They had forgotten that I didn't get where I was by being a pushover. I got here by seeing a problem and finding the most efficient, creative, and devastatingly effective solution. And right now, the problem was that my cousin was planning her dream wedding at a venue that symbolized our entire childhood. A wedding designed to celebrate her union while simultaneously cementing my exclusion from the family. The solution, the one that had sparked in my mind during that call, started to seem less like a wild, emotional impulse and more like a perfectly logical, strategic move. I wiped my eyes, took a deep, steadying breath, and turned back to my computer. The conference call I'd abandoned was a distant memory. My new project was Blackwood Manor. I opened a private browser window and started digging. I consumed every piece of information I could find. The history of the estate, built in the 1,920 seconds by a timber baron. The architectural details, the recent renovations, the list of preferred vendors, and most importantly, its ownership status. The online records were sparse. It was owned by a private trust, the Blackwood Heritage Trust. It wasn't listed on any public market. To any normal person, that would be a dead end. But I wasn't any normal person. I had resources. I pulled up the contact for a man named Arthur Harrison. Arthur wasn't just a real estate agent. He was a legend in the world of high-stakes, off-market transactions. He was a silver-haired shark in a bespoke suit who handled private islands, historic castles, and penthouses that were never advertised. He was discreet, ruthless, and impeccably effective. We had worked together once before when my company needed to acquire a piece of commercial property without alerting our competitors. He was the best. I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice as smooth and polished as ever. Amelia. To what do I owe the pleasure? I trust your data centers are secure. They are, Arthur. But I have a different kind of acquisition in mind. Something more personal, I said, my voice steady. Napa Valley. An estate called Blackwood Manor. There was a pause on his end. I could almost hear the gears turning in his brilliant mind. Ah, the Blackwood estate. A gem. Not on the market, as I'm sure you know. Owned by the descendants, an elderly couple, Charles and Eleanor Vance. They're fiercely private. They only open it for a handful of exclusive events each year to cover the staggering upkeep. They've turned down countless offers over the decades. What's your interest? I want to buy it, I said, the words sounding even more insane now that I was saying them out loud to someone else. Arthur was silent for a moment longer. He was likely calculating the astronomical difficulty, the sheer audacity of the request. Most agents would have laughed or tried to talk me down. That's why Arthur was the best. He didn't. Intriguing, he finally said, a hint of excitement in his voice. This isn't a standard transaction, Amelia. The Vances don't need the money. You can't just throw a number at them. This will require a delicate touch. A narrative. Why do you want it? And so I told him. I didn't give him the whole messy, emotional saga, but I gave him enough. I told him about my childhood connection to the place, about its significance to my family, about my desire to preserve its history and legacy. I framed it as a passion project, a way to honor my roots. I left out the part about my cousin's wedding and my ice-cold plan for revenge. Arthur didn't need to know the why behind the why. He just needed a story he could sell. I see, he said when I was done. A story of heritage and preservation. That I can work with. It's a much better angle than a tech CEO wanting another trophy property. The Vances might be receptive to that. But Amelia, this will be expensive, not just in price, but in time and effort. And there's a very high probability of failure. Are you prepared for that? I looked around my office, at the framed photo of my mother on my desk, her smile so full of hope and pride. I thought of her final wish for our family to stay together. And I realized this wasn't about pulling us apart. It was about surgically removing the cancer that was poisoning us from within: the jealousy, the greed, the cruelty. This was my way of taking care of the family, by refusing to let them destroy what was left of it. I am Arthur, I said, my voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even me. Find out what it will take. Whatever it is, I'm prepared to pay the price. As I hung up, I knew I had crossed a line. There was no going back. I had just set in motion a plan so elaborate, so expensive, so utterly unhinged, that it had to work. The investigation had begun. The hunt for Blackwood Manor was on. The days that followed my call with Arthur Harrison were a masterclass in controlled chaos. On the surface, I was the picture of normalcy. I ran my company, I held meetings, I approved budgets, and I smiled through video calls with investors across the globe. But beneath that calm exterior, a secret, high-stakes operation was unfolding, and the adrenaline was intoxicating. Arthur moved with the speed and precision of a predator. Within 48 hours, he had compiled a dossier on Charles and Eleanor Vance that would have put the CIA to shame. He knew their financial situation, stable, but property-rich, cash-poor, their personal history, their philanthropic interests, and most importantly, their deep, sentimental attachment to Blackwood Manor. The estate wasn't just a house to them, it was the repository of their entire family history. They're the gatekeepers of a legacy, Amelia, Arthur explained over a secure line a few days later. They see themselves as caretakers, not owners. They're terrified that if they sell, a developer will swoop in, gut the place, and turn it into a soulless luxury hotel or, worse, subdivide the land. This was the key. This was the opening we needed. My desire to buy it wasn't about development. It was, in its own twisted way, about preservation. Preservation of a dream, even if I had to own it to stop it from being corrupted. The strategy Arthur devised was brilliant. We wouldn't approach them with a cold offer. We would approach them with a proposal, a vision. He leveraged a connection through an art restoration charity Eleanor Vance was passionate about and arranged what was described as an informal chat at their private residence in San Francisco. He told me to leave the business talk to him. My role was to be the passionate historian, the woman with a deep personal connection to the land. Walking into the Vance's elegant Pacific Heights home felt like stepping into another era. It was filled with antique furniture, classical art, and the quiet dignity of old money. Charles was a tall, stoic man with kind eyes, while Eleanor had a warm, intelligent presence that immediately put me at ease. They served tea in delicate porcelain cups, and for the first hour, we didn't talk about the manor at all. We talked about San Francisco, about the tech industry, about art. I found myself genuinely enjoying their company. They were intelligent, cultured, and thoughtful. A part of me felt a pang of guilt for the underlying deception, but I pushed it down. The stakes were too high. Eventually, Arthur gently steered the conversation towards Napa Valley, and finally, to Blackwood Manor. I took that as my cue. I spoke from the heart, weaving in the true parts of my story. I told them about growing up nearby, about how my cousin and I used to peek through the gates, mesmerized by its beauty. I talked about how the manor was a symbol of magic and dreams in our childhood. I spoke of my late mother, and how she had instilled in me a deep appreciation for history and legacy. I've been fortunate in my career, I said, looking them both in the eye. And I've reached a point where I want to use my resources not just to build new things, but to protect beautiful old ones. Blackwood Manor isn't just property to me. It's a landmark, a piece of California history. My dream wouldn't be to change it, but to ensure it remains exactly as it is for the next 100 years. I watched their faces as I spoke. Charles's stoic expression softened, and I saw a flicker of understanding in Eleanor's eyes. They had heard this before, perhaps, but maybe not with the same genuine passion. Arthur then masterfully stepped in, outlining a potential structure for the sale. We weren't just proposing a purchase, we were proposing a stewardship. He suggested a plan where they could even retain lifetime rights to visit the property, ensuring them that its soul would not be disturbed. He mentioned my history of philanthropy and my company's commitment to community projects. He painted a picture of me not as a buyer, but as the perfect successor to their legacy. The meeting ended without a decision, but with a palpable shift in the air. They were considering it. The door, which had been locked and barred to everyone else, was now slightly ajar. What followed was 2 weeks of intense, nerve-wracking negotiations, all handled through Arthur. They had their lawyers, we had ours. An initial offer was floated, then countered. We went back and forth, not just on price, but on terms and conditions, clauses about historical preservation, and agreements about the staff who had worked at the manor for decades. I insisted we keep every single one of them on, at their current or better salaries. This, Arthur told me, was a major point in my favor. During this time, I was living a double life. By day, CEO. By night, obsessive researcher and clandestine estate buyer. I heard through the family grapevine my grandmother, who remained my one true ally, that Clara's wedding planning was in full swing. She had apparently paid a hefty, non-refundable deposit to Blackwood Manor to secure her date in 6 months' time. My grandmother, bless her heart, was heartbroken that I wasn't invited, but didn't know the full extent of the cruelty. Clara said it was a space issue, dear, she told me over the phone, her voice laced with confusion. It seems so strange. I just bit my tongue and said, "It's okay, Grandma. I understand." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. Hearing about that deposit was music to my ears. It was the first financial hook I had in her. The deal for the manor almost fell apart on 3 separate occasions. Once, over a dispute about water rights. Another time, when a distant cousin of the Vances caught wind of the potential sale and threatened to contest it. The final time was the worst. A rival offer materialized out of nowhere, a faceless international hotel consortium with bottomless pockets. They offered the Vances $2 million more than our agreed-upon price. My heart sank. I thought it was over. Arthur called me, his voice grim. They have a fiduciary duty to consider it, Amelia. We might have to walk away. No, I said, a cold determination hardening my voice. We're not walking away, match it. And tell them the offer is only good for 24 hours. But that's not all. I took a deep breath. Arthur, I want you to draft a personal letter from me to the Vances. I'm going to tell them exactly what the consortium will do, fire the staff, tear down the West Wing for a spa, and turn their family home into another generic luxury resort. And I'm going to reiterate my promise to preserve it. Appeal to their legacy, not their wallets. It was a massive gamble. It could have backfired spectacularly, coming off as arrogant or presumptuous. But my gut told me it was the right move. For 24 agonizing hours, I barely slept. I paced my apartment, checking my phone every 5 minutes. The silence was deafening. Then, just as the deadline was about to expire, Arthur called. I held my breath. "Congratulations, Amelia," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You are the new owner of Blackwood Manor." They accepted our offer. Your letter, they said, reminded them of what was truly important. I collapsed onto my sofa. A wave of relief so powerful it left me weak. It was done. For a final price of $8 million. The dream of our childhood, the stage for my cousin's ultimate social triumph, was mine. The papers were signed secretly through a shell corporation Arthur had set up, Napa Heritage Holdings, to keep my name off of everything until the time was right. To Clara, to my family, to the world, nothing had changed. The Vances had simply transferred management to a discreet holding company. The acquisition was complete. Phase 1 was over. Now, for the fun part. Phase 2. The slow, meticulous, and exquisitely painful tightening of the screws. Owning Blackwood Manor was a secret that burned in my chest like a hidden sundae. Every morning I woke up with the thrilling, terrifying knowledge that I was the puppet master of my cousin's most cherished dream. It was an incredible amount of power, and I intended to wield it with surgical precision. The first rule of this operation was anonymity. My name could not be associated with the manor under any circumstances. All communication, all official business, would be handled by Napa Heritage Holdings, with Arthur Harrison as its invisible, iron-fisted president. He was my proxy, my ghost in the machine. Our first move was to send out a formal, beautifully printed letter to all clients who had events booked at the manor, including one Miss Clara Sterling. The letter was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. It announced the exciting transition of Blackwood Manor's management to Napa Heritage Holdings, a firm dedicated to preserving the estate's timeless elegance while enhancing the client experience. It assured them that all existing contracts would be honored, but also vaguely mentioned that new operational protocols would be implemented to ensure the highest standards of quality and exclusivity. It was polite, professional, and utterly menacing in its vagueness. I waited. I knew Clara well enough to know this letter would drive her insane. She was a control freak. The idea that a new, unknown entity was now in charge of the most important day of her life would be like a persistent itch she couldn't scratch. Sure enough, about a week later, my grandmother called. "Oh, Amelia, it's the strangest thing," she began, her voice fluttering with concern. "Carol is in such a state. Apparently, some new company has taken over Blackwood Manor, and Clara is convinced they're going to ruin everything. She's been on the phone with them constantly, poor dear." I feigned ignorance and sympathy. Oh no, that sounds stressful. What are they doing? Well, according to Carol, they're very rigid, Grandma said. Clara wanted to bring in her own florist, a friend of Liam's mother. But this new company sent her a list of exclusively approved vendors. Her friend isn't on it. And the ones who are, well, they're frightfully expensive. Clara threw a fit, but the company wouldn't budge. They said it's their new policy for brand consistency. I had to physically cover the phone to muffle my laughter. That exclusively approved vendor list had been my first subtle masterpiece. I had Arthur's team research the most sought-after, talented, and ridiculously overpriced wedding vendors in all of Northern California. Florists who worked with celebrity clients, caterers with Michelin stars, photographers with 6-month waiting lists. My goal wasn't to deny Clara a beautiful wedding, but to make her original budget look like pocket change. I wanted to create 1,000 little paper cuts that would slowly bleed her and Liam's finances dry, all while maintaining a facade of offering only the best. The next step was the catering. Clara and Liam had planned a menu with a caterer they loved. Arthur, speaking as the voice of Napa Heritage Holdings, informed them that all menus now had to be approved by the estate's new executive culinary consultant to ensure a cohesive gastronomic experience. The consultant, of course, was me, operating under a pseudonym. I rejected their initial menu proposal. My feedback, delivered via a formal email from Arthur's assistant, was devastatingly polite. While the proposed menu is adequate, it read, it lacks the innovative flair and farm-to-table focus that aligns with the Blackwood brand. We suggest a more elevated selection. Attached was a sample menu I had designed with the help of a world-renowned chef I had on my company's board. It featured things like truffle-infused risotto, pan-seared scallops with a saffron reduction, and a deconstructed tiramisu. It was exquisite. It was also 3 times the price of their original menu. The frantic phone calls from Clara to management became a daily occurrence. Arthur's assistant, a wonderfully stoic woman named Miss Davis, would dutifully log each call and send me a summary. Clara was alternating between screaming threats and pathetic pleas. She demanded to speak to the owner. Miss Davis would calmly reply, "The ownership is a private trust, miss. All operational decisions are handled by the management team." Then came the double booking scare. This was Arthur's idea, and it was pure evil genius. 2 months before the wedding, he sent Clara a very apologetic email. It explained that due to a clerical error during the management transition, her wedding date appeared to have a potential conflict with a long-standing biennial charity gala hosted by the Vance Family Trust. It was a complete fabrication, of course, but it was plausible. The email explained that they were working diligently to resolve the unfortunate oversight, but couldn't make any guarantees. The fallout was spectacular. Aunt Carol called my grandmother in a full-blown panic, and Grandma, in turn, called me. "Amelia, it's a disaster! They might cancel Clara's wedding!" After she paid that enormous deposit, Carol is beside herself. She says this new company is a nightmare, completely incompetent. "Oh, Grandma, that's horrible," I said, my voice dripping with fake concern. "Is there anything I can do? I know I'm not, invited, but she's still my cousin. Maybe I could call the venue for her? Plead her case?" "Would you, dear? Oh, that would be so kind of you." This was the moment I had been waiting for. I, the cast-off, the distraction, was now being positioned to look like the savior. I waited a day, then called my own employee, Ms. Davis. I put on the performance of a lifetime. I was the concerned cousin, begging, pleading for them to find a solution. Miss Davis, following our script, was initially firm but eventually relented under my passionate appeal. After a tense 24-hour waiting period, Management sent Clara an email confirming that they had successfully rearranged the schedule and her wedding date was secure. The charity gala, they explained, had been graciously moved. Clara didn't thank me, of course. Aunt Carol told Grandma that it was probably their threats of legal action that did the trick, but the seed was planted. In my grandmother's eyes, and perhaps a few other family members she spoke to, I was the one who had tried to help. I was the bigger person, reaching out with kindness despite being snubbed. Meanwhile, I was the architect of their misery. The stress was clearly getting to Clara. A mutual friend who had seen her at a bridal shower told me she looked haggard and stressed to the max. She had apparently complained for a solid hour about the dictators running her venue. The illusion of her perfect, exclusive, high society wedding was cracking under the pressure of 1,000 tiny, meticulously planned inconveniences. And I was just getting started. The vendor list and the menu were just the appetizers. The main course of my revenge was yet to be served. The constant pressure on Clara's budget and her patience was working perfectly. But I knew that to make this truly effective, I needed to go beyond mere inconvenience. I needed to create a situation where she would become her own worst enemy. The next phase of my plan was to build a financial trap so elegant and appealing that she would walk into it willingly, even eagerly. This required a deep dive into her and Liam's finances, something that felt intrusive but utterly necessary for my strategy. Through my network, I discreetly engaged a private financial investigator, framing it as due diligence for a potential business investment with Liam. The report that came back was exactly what I suspected, and yet it was still shocking in its audacity. Clara and Liam were living a lie. They were drowning in debt. Liam's startup, the one I had funded, had quietly folded months ago, a fact they had hidden from everyone. They were living off credit cards and a dwindling inheritance from Liam's side, all while putting on a grand show of wealth and success. The wedding at Blackwood Manor wasn't just a celebration, it was a performance, a desperate attempt to project an image of status they simply did not possess. The investigators' report revealed their biggest vulnerability. They had scraped together just enough for the initial non-refundable deposit for the manor, but they were counting on wedding gifts specifically, a large cash gift they were expecting from Liam's wealthy grandmother to cover the rest of the staggering costs. They were gambling their entire future on this one day. This was the leverage I needed. It was time for Napa Heritage Holdings to appear not as an adversary, but as a surprisingly helpful partner. Arthur Harrison drafted an email to Clara that was a work of art. It began by apologizing for the initial friction during the management transition and the unfortunate clerical error with the scheduling. To demonstrate our commitment to making your day perfect, the email continued, and to thank you for your patience, we would like to offer you a unique payment solution. The offer was this. Instead of the standard payment schedule 50% due 90 days out, and the final balance 30 days before the event, they could opt into a new Blackwood Prestige plan. This plan allowed them to pay in smaller, more manageable monthly installments. The catch, buried in the fine print, was that this plan required them to lock in all their major vendors, catering, lighting, sound, through the manor's in-house coordination service. And, most importantly, every single installment paid was 100% non-refundable under any circumstances. To make it even more enticing, if they signed up within the next 48 hours, they would receive a complimentary upgrade to the premium champagne package for their cocktail hour. It was the perfect trap. It offered them what they desperately needed, a way to manage their cash flow problem without having to produce a huge lump sum of money they didn't have. The free champagne was the shiny lure that would distract them from the vicious hook of the non-refundable clause. They were so focused on the short-term relief that they wouldn't see the long-term prison they were building for themselves. I waited, my heart pounding. This was a critical juncture. If they were smart, they'd be suspicious. They'd have a lawyer review the contract. but I was banking on their arrogance and their desperation. I was right. Less than 12 hours later, Miss Davis informed me that they had signed the agreement and paid the first installment. They were in. Every dollar they paid from that point on was another bar on their cage, a cage they were happily helping me build. With their finances now tethered to the manor, I could escalate the pressure. The monthly invoices went out like clockwork. The base fee for the venue, the installment for the ridiculously expensive catering package they'd been forced to select, the charge for the approved florist, the fee for the in-house lighting designer whose services were now mandatory. Each invoice was a beautifully designed, itemized list of their crumbling dream. I could picture their arguments, the stress mounting as they scraped together the money each month, their credit card balances climbing higher and higher. My grandmother provided the running commentary. "Poor Clara seems so on edge," she'd say. "She snapped at me on the phone the other day. She and Liam are fighting constantly about money, according to Carol. This wedding seems to be causing them so much more stress than joy." I would murmur sympathetic words, all the while knowing I was the source of that stress. It was a strange, disembodying feeling, being both the confidant and the tormentor. But then I would remember the coldness in Clara's voice on that phone call, the casual dismissal of my entire existence, and any guilt I felt would evaporate, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. This wasn't just about making them pay money. It was about making them pay a price in the currency they understood best: social standing and appearances. The trap was now fully set and baited. They were financially committed, locked into a non-refundable contract, and bleeding money every month. Their dream wedding was becoming a financial nightmare. But the true beauty of the plan was that, from the outside, it looked like they were getting everything they wanted. They could still tell their friends they were getting married at Blackwood Manor. They could still post about their menu tastings with a world-class chef. They were maintaining the facade, even as the foundation was rotting away from beneath them. The public humiliation would come later. For now, I was content to watch them struggle in the gilded cage they had so eagerly entered, knowing that I held the only key, and I had no intention of using it to let them out. With Clara and Liam firmly caught in the financial web I had spun, it was time to transition from financial pressure to psychological warfare. The goal was to make the entire wedding planning process so frustrating, so maddening, that the event itself would be tainted with misery before a single guest arrived. My weapon of choice was relentless, soul-crushing bureaucracy, all delivered with a smile by the ever-professional Napa Heritage Holdings. The first target was the wedding cake. Clara had her heart set on a specific, very trendy baker known for her elaborate, multi-tiered creations. Of course, this baker was not on our approved list. When Clara submitted a request for an exception, it was denied. The reason given was a new, completely fabricated allergen and food safety protocol that required all baked goods to be prepared in a facility that had been pre-certified by the Manor's health consultant, another fictitious role I had invented. We offered her a choice of 3 approved bakers. They were all excellent, of course, but they weren't her baker. It was a small thing, but I knew for a bride like Clara, whose vision was absolute, it would feel like a major blow. Next came the floor plan. Clara submitted a detailed seating arrangement for the ballroom. A week later, she received a response. The Manor's Historical Preservation Committee, consisting of me and a glass of wine, had reviewed her plan and found that it placed too much weight on a specific section of the original 1,920 seconds hardwood floor. Her plan was rejected. She was sent a selection of 3 pre-approved layouts, all of which were less ideal, either separating key family tables or creating awkward traffic flows. The email helpfully noted, "We appreciate your understanding in our efforts to preserve the irreplaceable heritage of the estate." How could she argue with that? She was being thwarted by history itself. The meltdowns, as reported by Miss Davis, were becoming more frequent and more intense. Clara's emails, which had started as demanding, were now becoming frantic and filled with typos. Her phone calls were no longer just angry. They were desperate. She was losing control, and for someone like Clara, losing control was like running out of oxygen. The pinnacle of this phase was what I privately dubbed the Great Music Debacle. Clara and Liam had hired a popular and very loud 10-piece band for their reception. 3 weeks before the wedding, Arthur's team sent them an official notice. As per the Township of Street, Helena's revised Noise Ordinance 11, 2B, it read, all outdoor and indoor events at venues within the historic district must adhere to a strict decibel limit of 85 decibels after 9 p.m. This was, again, a complete fabrication. I had Arthur's legal team draft a document that looked so official, so full of bureaucratic jargon, that it was utterly believable. The notice explained that a sound engineer from the manor would be present at the event to monitor the levels, and any violation would result in an immediate shutdown of the music and a significant fine, as stipulated in their contract. An 85 decibel limit is roughly the sound of a vacuum cleaner. For a 10-piece party band, it was an impossible constraint. It effectively neutered their reception. They could have their band, but they would have to play at the volume of a gentle whisper. The alternative we offered was to hire a string quartet or a jazz trio from our approved list, elegant, quiet, and completely wrong for the wild party atmosphere they had envisioned. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. I knew this because I orchestrated a way to hear it from myself. I had my grandmother mention to Aunt Carol that I was going to be in Napa for a business meeting on a specific day. I knew from Clara's social media that she was scheduled to be at the manor that same day for a final walkthrough. I booked a private tour of a nearby winery, one whose veranda overlooked the road leading to Blackwood Manor. As I sat there, sipping a Sauvignon Blanc, I saw Clara's white Range Rover tear up the road and swerve into the manor's entrance. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. It was Clara. Her voice was a ragged, hysterical shriek. "You did this!" she screamed, without even a hello. "I don't know how, but you are behind this. This nightmare company. This is all your fault." I feigned utter confusion. "Clara? What are you talking about? I'm in a meeting. Is everything okay?" "Don't you lie to me, Amelia," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "My wedding. It's ruined. The music, the cake, the flowers, they're controlling everything. They're ruining my life." "Clara, I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice calm and gentle. "I offered to help before, remember? I'm sorry you're going through this, but I have nothing to do with the venue's management." "Liar," she screeched. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? You, in your perfect little life, you love that I'm miserable." And then I heard it, Liam in the background, his voice low and angry. "Clara, get off the phone. You sound insane." "Who are you even talking to?" The call ended abruptly. I put down my phone, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was even better than I had imagined. She knew. She didn't have proof, but in her gut, she knew she was being played. And because she had no proof, she sounded like a paranoid, unhinged lunatic to everyone around her, including her own fiancé. My revenge wasn't just about financial ruin or logistical headaches. It was about psychological isolation. I had engineered a situation where her own justifiable frustration made her look crazy, driving a wedge between her and her partner. The reports I got from the manor staff, my loyal, well-paid staff, confirmed the chaos. The final walkthrough had been a disaster. Clara had apparently screamed at the venue coordinator, burst into tears in the ballroom, and accused the management of a conspiracy against her. Liam had been mortified, trying to apologize for her behavior while simultaneously looking at her with a new, cold expression of annoyance. The perfect power couple was starting to fracture under the weight of the perfect storm I had created. Their dream was curdling into a nightmare, and the wedding was still weeks away. There was still so much more fun to be had. With Clara spiraling and her relationship with Liam showing visible cracks, it was time to deploy the most delicate and manipulative phase of the entire operation, positioning myself as the benevolent, long-suffering victim. The narrative needed to shift. In the eyes of the family, especially the older, more traditional members like my grandmother and great-aunts, Clara's increasingly erratic behavior needed a counterpoint. That counterpoint would be me, the picture of grace, forgiveness, and quiet strength. If Clara was the storm, I would be the calm, clear sky that emerged after it passed, making her chaos look even more unhinged in comparison. My first move was to send a gift. It was a week after Clara's hysterical phone call. I went to a high-end boutique and purchased an exquisite, hand-embroidered silk robe, the kind a bride might wear on her wedding morning. It was expensive, elegant, and thoughtful. I had it beautifully gift-wrapped and sent to her house with a handwritten card. The card was my masterwork of passive aggression. "Dearest Clara," it read, "I was so sorry to hear how much stress you've been under with the wedding planning. I can only imagine how difficult it must be when things don't go as you envisioned. Please know that despite our differences, and though I won't be there to see it, I am thinking of you and wishing you a beautiful wedding day. I hope you can find moments of peace and joy amidst the chaos. With love, Amelia." Every word was chosen with care. Despite our differences, acknowledged the rift but framed me as the one willing to look past it. Though I won't be there was a gentle, guilt-inducing reminder of my exclusion. Wishing you peace and joy amidst the chaos was the final, perfect twist of the knife, implying that I knew her life was chaotic while mine was peaceful. The gift was an olive branch laced with poison. It was an act of kindness so pure on the surface that to reject it would make her look petty and ungrateful, and to accept it meant accepting the narrative that I was the bigger person. As expected, it created a stir. Aunt Carol called my grandmother, completely bewildered. "I don't understand that girl," she complained. "First, she's uninvited, and now she's sending Clara a $500 robe? What is she playing at?" My grandmother, my beautiful, unsuspecting pawn in this chess game, defended me fiercely. "She's being kind, Carol. She's taking the high road, something you and Clara could learn from." Amelia has a good heart, just like her mother. The family was now divided into two camps. Those who saw Clara as a stressed-out bride being harassed by a difficult venue, and those who were beginning to see her as an ungrateful brat and me as a veritable saint. This was exactly what I wanted. My next move was even bolder. I knew from the financial investigator's report that Liam's wealthy grandmother, a formidable matriarch named Eleanor, was the financial linchpin of their whole charade. She was the one they were counting on for the large cash gift to pay off their wedding debts. I decided it was time to meet Eleanor. I discovered through my network that she was a major patron of the San Francisco Opera, just as I was. It was a simple matter to arrange to be seated near her at the next gala performance. During intermission, I accidentally bumped into her in the lobby. "Oh, forgive me," I said, pretending to be flustered. I introduced myself. "Amelia Sterling. I don't believe we've been formally introduced, but my cousin Clara is marrying your grandson, Liam." Eleanor's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, of course. Amelia, I've heard bits and pieces about you." There was a note of caution in her voice. "I'm sure you have," I said, with a small, sad smile. "Things are a bit strained at the moment. It's a long story, but I mainly wanted to say what a lovely man your grandson Island. Clara is a very lucky woman." I laid it on thick. praising Liam, praising their family, never once mentioning the wedding invitation or the drama. I spoke about my own company, my passion for technology, and my philanthropic work. I presented myself as a calm, successful, and reasonable person. Then, just as the bell chimed for the second act, I delivered the carefully planned parting shot. "It's such a shame I won't be at the wedding to celebrate with you all," I said, my voice filled with believable regret. Clara felt my presence might be overwhelming for their guests. I understand, of course. The most important thing is her happiness. I let that hang in the air for a moment, then gave her a warm smile and said, "It was a pleasure to meet you, Eleanor." I walked away, not looking back, but I could feel her eyes on me. I had just planted a powerful seed of doubt in the mind of their primary investor. I hadn't been angry or accusatory. I had been graceful and forgiving, which is so much more damning. She had just met a poised, successful woman who had been inexplicably cast out of her own family's celebration for being too overwhelming. It wouldn't make sense to a woman of her generation and stature. She would start asking questions. The final act of this phase came when Clara, pushed to the absolute brink of her financial and emotional limits, did something I had anticipated but still found shocking. She called me. It was late at night, and her voice was stripped of all its earlier arrogance. It was small, thin, and desperate. "Amelia," she whispered, I need your help." I sat in the dark of my living room, the city lights twinkling below, and listened. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just launched into a rambling, tearful story about a surprise vendor bill and a miscalculation. She needed a loan, a substantial one. Just until after the wedding, she promised. "Liam's grandmother is giving us a very generous gift. We can pay you back right away." This was the moment. The checkmate. She was coming to the ATM for one last withdrawal. I let the silence stretch out, letting her hang in her own desperation. "Oh, Clara," I finally said, my voice filled with a deep, sorrowful sigh. "I would love to help. I truly would. But I just can't." "What? Why not?" she asked, a note of her old, demanding self creeping back in. "Because my financial advisor has me on a very strict capital freeze right now," I lied smoothly. "All my liquid assets are tied up in a new acquisition, and he would have my head if I made any large, unsecured personal loans. It's just impossible timing. I am so sorry." I had never in my life felt more powerful. By refusing her, I wasn't just denying her money. I was denying her the last vestige of her power over me. I was taking away the one role she had left for me in her life, the convenient solution to her problems. The silence on the other end of the line was filled with her dawning, impotent rage. I had played the part of the sympathetic ear, the bigger person, and the gracious victim perfectly. And now, having exhausted all her options, having been thwarted at every turn, she was truly, utterly on her own. The stage was set for the final act. The week of the wedding arrived like a gathering storm cloud over Napa Valley. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a feeling I could sense even from my command center in San Francisco. My grandmother had stopped providing updates. I think even she realized the situation had become too toxic and had decided to retreat into a worried neutrality. It didn't matter. I had my own sources. The staff at Blackwood Manor were my eyes and ears, and their reports painted a picture of a bride on the verge of a complete nervous breakdown. Clara was apparently snapping at everyone, from the floral arrangers to her own bridesmaids. Liam was described as being distant and permanently attached to a glass of whiskey. Their dream wedding had become a grim march towards the finish line they seemed to dread. It was time for the final, catastrophic blow. The problem I had invented for this purpose had to be something so fundamental, so unfixable, that it would be the one thing that could shatter their fragile facade completely. It had to be something that money, threats, or tears could not solve. It had to be structural. On the Tuesday before the Saturday wedding, with guests already beginning to fly in from out of state, Arthur Harrison, in his capacity as president of Napa Heritage Holdings, made a phone call to Clara. I was patched in silently, listening to every word, my heart thrumming with a dark, exhilarating rhythm. Arthur's voice was the epitome of grave, professional concern. "Miss Sterling," he began, "I am calling with some deeply unfortunate news. As you know, we have an engineering team that conducts regular structural assessments of the historic estate. During their final pre-event inspection this morning, they discovered a significant issue in the main ballroom." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. What kind of issue?" Clara's voice was tight with suspicion and fear. "They've found a substantial crack in one of the main support beams beneath the ballroom floor," Arthur said, his tone dripping with regret. "The engineers have deemed it a critical safety hazard. They've red-tagged the area. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but under no circumstances can we allow a large gathering in the ballroom until extensive repairs can be completed. It is structurally unsound." The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the faint hum of my refrigerator. I had my own team of engineers inspect the manor from top to bottom when I bought it. It was as solid as a fortress. The beam was a fiction, but a terrifyingly plausible one. "No," Clara whispered. "No, you're lying. This is another one of your tricks." "I assure you, Miss Sterling, this is no trick," Arthur said calmly. "We have the engineering report, which we are legally obligated to file with the county. The safety of your guests is our absolute, non-negotiable priority. We would never risk a catastrophe." "So what am I supposed to do?" she shrieked, her voice escalating into hysteria. "My wedding is in 4 days. I have 200 guests. Where are we supposed to have the reception?" This was the moment for the solution, the final, insulting twist of the knife. "We understand this is a terrible inconvenience," Arthur said smoothly. "And while our contract protects us from liability in cases of structural failure, we are prepared to offer you an alternative. We can set up our high-end event tent on the west lawn. It's a lovely space. An outdoor tent. In mid-October in Napa, where the evenings were notoriously chilly and damp, her dream of a grand reception in the historic, crystal-chandeliered ballroom was being replaced by a tent on the grass. It was the ultimate downgrade, a public symbol of her failure. It was the equivalent of swapping a diamond for a piece of glass. "A tent!" she screamed, the word tearing from her throat. "I am paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for a historic mansion, and you are offering me a tent? This is a joke! I will sue you! I will sue everyone! I will ruin you!" "The tent is our only offer, Miss Sterling," Arthur said, his voice now turning cold. "That, or you are welcome to cancel the event. But as you know, per the agreement you signed, all payments made to date are non-refundable. Checkmate." She was trapped. She could either endure the supreme humiliation of a tent wedding that would be the talk of her social circle for years, or she could cancel everything, losing all the money and having to explain to 200 guests why her perfect wedding had imploded at the last minute. There was no good option. The aftermath was exactly as I'd planned. Clara's tantrum was of epic proportions. She apparently threw her phone across the room, shattering it. The staff reported hearing her screaming at Liam, who simply walked out, got in his car, and drove away. Later that day, Aunt Carol began a frantic campaign of calling every influential person she knew, trying to find someone who could pull strings, only to be met with the unassailable wall of a filed engineering report and a county safety violation. They were utterly, completely powerless. That evening, I received a call from my grandmother. She was weeping. "Amelia, it's over," she cried. "The wedding is off. Carol just called me. Clara and Liam had a terrible fight. He's left her. He said he couldn't handle the drama and the public humiliation anymore. He's gone. So Liam, the ambitious social climber, had abandoned ship at the first sign of it actually sinking. It was a development I hadn't explicitly planned, but it wasn't surprising. His commitment was to the image, not to the person. With the image now shattered, he had no reason to stay. "Oh, Grandma," I said, my voice soft. "I'm so sorry to hear that. They're calling an emergency family meeting at the manor tomorrow morning," she continued, sniffling. "The management company agreed to let them meet there to, I don't know, discuss what to do. Carol insisted I ask you to come," she said. "She said maybe you can help talk some sense into the venue owners." The invitation. The final, perfect piece of irony. After being uninvited, I was now being summoned to the scene of the crime as a potential mediator, the last hope for a family that had cast me out. They still had no idea that the person they wanted me to reason with was me. "Of course, Grandma," I said, my voice steady as a rock. "Tell them I'll be there." The war was over. All that was left was to survey the battlefield and claim my victory. The drive up to Napa the next morning felt different. The rolling hills, usually a sight of serene beauty, seemed to hold a quiet, anticipatory tension. The sky was a crisp, brilliant blue, a perfect California day for a wedding that would never happen. I wasn't nervous. I was filled with a strange, cold calm. The intricate months-long campaign of strategy and subterfuge was over. Today was about one thing: the reveal. I had dressed for the occasion, not in a power suit, but in an elegant, understated cashmere dress in a soft cream color. I wanted to look serene, untouchable, the very picture of the grace they had accused me of lacking. I wanted the contrast between my composure and their chaos to be as stark as possible. When I pulled my car through the grand iron gates of Blackwood Manor, my manor, I felt a profound sense of ownership that went far beyond a legal deed. I was reclaiming a piece of my own history. I parked not in the guest lot, but in the private drive near the main house. Arthur Harrison was waiting for me on the stone steps, looking impeccable in a dark suit. He gave me a subtle nod, his eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of a shared victory. "They are in the grand library," he murmured. "All present and accounted for. They are agitated." "I imagine they are," I said with a small smile. "Let's not keep them waiting." We walked through the marble entryway, our footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. As we approached the library, I could hear their voices, sharp and angry, spilling out from behind the heavy oak doors. Aunt Carol's voice was the loudest, shrill with fury. "This is an outrage! A breach of contract! We will own this place by the time our lawyers are done with them." Arthur pushed open the doors and we stepped inside. The scene was exactly as I had pictured. My Aunt Carol, her face splotchy and red with rage, was pacing in front of the massive, unlit fireplace. Clara was slumped in a velvet wingback chair, her face pale and tear-stained, looking like a ghost of the triumphant bride she was supposed to be. Her father, my Uncle Robert, who had been a silent accomplice through all of this, stood awkwardly by the window, wringing his hands. Liam was conspicuously absent. They all fell silent as we entered, their heads snapping towards us. Aunt Carol's eyes narrowed, zeroing in on Arthur. "You!" she hissed. "You're the one I've been speaking to! You have some nerve showing your face here. I am Arthur Harrison, president of Napa Heritage Holdings," he said, his voice impossibly calm. "I understood you wished to have a meeting to discuss the situation." "Discuss?" Aunt Carol shrieked. "My daughter's wedding is ruined. Her life is ruined. And you talk about discussing? We demand to speak to the owner of this place. Now! No more hiding behind your faceless corporation. We want to know who is responsible for this." Arthur held her gaze, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. He let the demand hang in the air for a long, delicious moment, allowing their desperation to peak. Clara lifted her head, her eyes, filled with a mixture of hope and despair, fixed on him. She still believed there was some mysterious, powerful figure she could appeal to, or threaten. "Very well," Arthur said finally, turning his head slightly towards me. I had been standing just behind him, partially obscured, a quiet observer. "You wish to meet the owner?" "Of course. She has been looking forward to meeting you as well." He took one step to the side. I took one step forward, into the center of the room, into the morning light streaming through the tall library windows. For a full 5 seconds, there was absolute, uncomprehending silence. They stared at me, their brains trying to process a reality that was simply too impossible to compute. I was Amelia. I was the uninvited cousin. I was the family outcast. I was not supposed to be here. The gears were turning, but they were grinding, catching, refusing to lock into place. It was Clara who understood first. I watched it happen in her eyes. The confusion slowly melted away, replaced by a dawning wave of sheer, unadulterated horror. Her mouth fell open. A small, strangled gasp escaped her lips. The color drained completely from her face, leaving it a waxy, sickly white. Aunt Carol was next. Her jaw went slack, her furious expression dissolving into slack-jawed disbelief. She looked from me to Arthur, and back to me, her eyes wide with a terror that was deeply, deeply satisfying to witness. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "It can't be." "Hello, Aunt Carol." "Clara," I said, my voice quiet, but it carried in the silent room like a judge's sentence. "You wanted to speak with the owner of Blackwood Manor?" "Well, here I am." The dam of their composure broke. Aunt Carol let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. You bought it? You bought this entire place? To do this to us?" "No, Aunt Carol," I said, taking another calm step forward. "You have it wrong. I didn't buy it to do this to you. I bought it because you made it perfectly clear that I was not welcome in your world. So I decided to buy the part of your world that mattered most. The part that was built on a dream that was once mine, too." Clara finally found her voice. "It was a broken, pathetic thing." "Why?" she whimpered, tears streaming down her ghostly pale cheeks. "Why would you do this?" And I looked directly at her, at the girl I had shared childhood secrets with, the cousin I had loved, and I gave her the honest, unvarnished truth. "You asked me why," I said, my voice cold and clear as ice. "You stood in your kitchen, with your mother whispering in your ear, and you threw me away like I was nothing. You called me a distraction. You said my life didn't fit your vibe. You took our shared dream, this very place, and you tried to turn it into a weapon to humiliate me. You didn't just uninvite me from a party, Clara. You tried to erase me from our family, from our history. You just never imagined that I had the resources to buy the history book myself." I let my words sink in, watching as the full scope of their miscalculation crashed down upon them. They had picked a fight with the one person who had the means, the intelligence, and now, the motivation, to finish it. They hadn't just lost a wedding venue. They had lost everything, and they had no one to blame but themselves. The aftermath of the reveal was not a fiery explosion, but the quiet, devastating implosion of a dying star. Clara didn't scream or rage anymore. She simply collapsed in on herself, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. All the fight, all the arrogance had been extinguished, leaving behind only the empty shell of a broken woman. Aunt Carol, for the first time in her life, was rendered speechless. She stared at me, her face a mask of utter devastation, as if she was seeing not just me, her niece, but the full, catastrophic consequences of her lifelong jealousy and bitterness. Uncle Robert finally spoke, his voice raspy with shame. "Amelia, I had no idea. I am so sorry." I just looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of weary pity. His silence had been his complicity, and he knew it. I didn't stay to lord my victory over them. There was nothing left to say. The point had been made, not with shouting, but with the cold, hard reality of a signed deed and a cancelled wedding. Arthur and I walked out of the library, leaving them to sit in the ruins of the world they had so carefully constructed. As we crossed the marble foyer, I heard my grandmother's voice. She was standing by the grand staircase, her face etched with a profound sadness. She had clearly been told everything. "Amelia," she said softly, her eyes swimming with tears. "Your mother, she would have been so heartbroken by all of this." Her words were the only thing that day that managed to pierce my armor. "I know, Grandma," I whispered, my own voice catching. "But I also think she would have been heartbroken to see what they had become. Sometimes, the only way to stop a poison from spreading is to cut it out completely. I did this to protect what's left, not to destroy it." She pulled me into a hug, and in her embrace, I finally let myself feel the immense weight of what I had done, the cost of a victory that felt necessary but deeply sorrowful. In the weeks that followed, the story rippled through our family and their social circle with the force of a tsunami. The official story was that the wedding was postponed indefinitely, but the truth, in all its juicy, scandalous detail, spread like wildfire. Clara and Liam never got back together. He moved out of state, eager to escape the humiliation and the mountain of debt they had accrued. Clara, stripped of her fiancé and her dream wedding, had to move back in with her parents. The grand life she had been so desperate to project had vanished overnight. I received a handful of angry texts from distant relatives who sided with Aunt Carol, calling me vindictive and cruel. I deleted them without a second thought. But I also received calls from others, family members who had long been tired of Aunt Carol's manipulations, who quietly told me they understood that it was a harsh lesson, but one that was long overdue. The family had fractured, but perhaps it had broken along lines that were already weak, revealing the true foundations beneath. For a while, I wasn't sure what to do with Blackwood Manor. The place was imbued with so much pain and triumph. But one afternoon, as I was walking through the empty ballroom, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, I thought of my mother. She had been a brilliant woman, a natural mentor who had always championed other women, encouraging them to pursue their dreams, no matter how audacious. And in that moment, the future of the manor became crystal clear. It would not be a wedding venue. It would not be a private residence. I decided to turn Blackwood Manor into the headquarters for a new foundation, the Eleanor Sterling Foundation, named after my mother. Its mission would be to support and mentor young, underserved women in tech, providing them with scholarships, seed funding for their startups, and a place to connect and grow. The manor would become a retreat center, a place where bright, ambitious young women could come to dream, just as Clara and I once had, but with the resources and support to actually make those dreams a reality. The work of setting up the foundation consumed me. It was a new passion, a new purpose. It was a way to transform an act of revenge into an act of creation, to turn a place of personal victory into a place of public good. It was my way of honoring my mother's legacy in a way that was truer than just keeping a fractured family together. I was building a new family, a family of intelligent, driven women who would support and uplift each other. About a year later, we held the foundation's inaugural summit at the manor. It was filled with laughter, brilliant ideas, and the infectious energy of 100 young women on the cusp of changing the world. As I stood on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the Napa Hills in shades of gold and purple, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I had not only reclaimed my past, but I had also built a future, a legacy that would echo far beyond the petty squabbles of one family. I don't know what became of Clara. I hear she's working a quiet office job somewhere. We haven't spoken since that day in the library, and I don't think we ever will. I have no hatred left for her, only a distant, sad pity. She got trapped in a story of envy and appearances, while I was lucky enough to be able to write my own. I learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about who stands by you, who believes in you, and who inspires you to be the best version of yourself. My family is now the young women who walk these halls, their minds full of code and dreams. And Blackwood Manor, once the symbol of a broken childhood promise, is now a testament to a new one. The promise of a future where any woman with enough grit and a good idea can build her own castle. Gatekeepers be damned.